From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
As a little bit of background, the American Folklife Center traces its long and illustrious history back to the Archive of Folksong, which was established in 1928 in the music division here at the library. And over the years, the American Folklife Center and the archive have had the great fortune to count many illustrious and distinguished folklorists, ethnomusicologists, folk song collectors, and folk singers, I should say, as part of our staff, starting with Robert Winslow Gordon, and John Lomax and his son, Alan Lomax, Benjamin Botkin, Ray Corson, an intern named Pete Seeger, and of course, today's speaker, Joe Hickerson. Joe is visiting us from the West Coast, as I know many of you know. But Joe came to what was then titled the Archive of Folksong in 1963, after earning a BA at Oberlin College and studying folklore ethnomusicology at Indiana University's Folklore Institute, earning an MA there. In 1974, he was named as the head of the archive, and he remained at that post until his retirement in 1998. I could list his many accomplishments, putting in many years of great service for the American Folklore Society, the Society for Ethnomusicology, being one of the founders of the Folklore Society of Greater Washington, of which I know we have many members here today, his scholarship with Sing Out magazine, and his own career as a collector, composer, performer, and recording artist. And I hope many of you will stop by the table in the back after our session here today and talk with Joe about the recordings, buy some recordings, and generally have a good time. But before I turn it over to Joe, I also want to introduce our another illustrious staff member of ours, Jennifer Cutting, who also I know many of you know. In addition to her great work here at the American Folklife Center, she too is also has an impressive track record as a performer and recording artist herself. And she'll be leading this conversation today with Joe, who is a good old dear friend of hers and ours. So without further ado, please welcome Jennifer Cutting and Joe Hickerson.
Thank you so much, Betsy. And how wonderful to see so many of you from Library of Congressdom, folkdom in all of its aspects, old friends and new friends. We have the interns from the Rinzler Archives here. Thank you all for coming out on this hot, muggy day. And it's really going to be worth it because the man who's sitting here to my left is the institutional memory of the archive. And Joe was here for 35 years as first reference librarian and then head of the folk archive. And I was lucky because I overlapped with Joe by 12 years. So I had 12 wonderful years of Joe's wicked puns and amazing sense of humor and keen intellect. Unfortunately, I didn't inherit his steel trap of a mind for details, but I'm still working on that, Joe. Joe has been a big role model for me in how to be a folklorist and a performer of folk material. And he has had and is continuing to have the most amazing life in folk music. It's so amazing that when I did my last oral history with Joe in 2003, this oral history took 5 hours. So we're not going to do that today. Today, we have only 1 hour. So if you want to hear all about Joe's earlier life, his time at Oberlin and Indiana University during the folk boom years, please come to the Folklife Reading Room and ask for AFC 2003/028, called simply the Joseph C. Hickerson interview collection. Before we go on, I want to thank the American Folklife Center event staff, the folks who work so hard to bring these events to us. Nancy Gross, who's the coordinator of the Benjamin Botkin Lecture Series, who invited Joe to speak today. Nancy Gross, Thea Austin, who founded the Botkin Series, and she's AFC's public events coordinator. Steve Winnick, our writer-editor, and today, photographer. And the sound engineers at the board, who are Mike Turpin and Jay Kinlock from the music division. Thank all of you for helping this happen today.
And Jonathan?
John Gold, American Folklife Center engineer, John Gold. Thank you, too. Okay, gosh, we have an hour. So what I want to do, Joe, is focus in on your time here at the Library of Congress, at the archive, and on that fabulous intersection between archiving and performing, for which you're justly famous. The joy you took in finding great songs here and taking them out to the people. And of course, we're going to leave a little time for questions at the end, so be thinking of your questions for Joe. And last but not least, singing, because you're famous as a song leader. Speaking of that, do you want to start us out with a song?
Oh, why should we at our lot complain or grieve at our distress? Some think if they could riches gain, 'twould bring true happiness. But alas, how vain is all their strife, life's cares it will not allay. So while we're here with our friends so dear, we'll drive dull care away. Away, 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 we will drive dull care away. And while we're here with our friends so dear, we'll drive dull care away. So let us make the best of life, not rendering it a curse, or take it as you would a wife, for better or for worse. Life at its best is but a jest, like a dreary winter's day. So while we're here with our friends so dear, we'll drive dull care away. Away, 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 we will drive dull care away. When while we're here with our friends so dear, we'll drive dull care away. Now, I learned that song in 1972 out of a collection of about 22 songs from Prince Edward Island. It was issued as one of the annual issues of Northeast Folklore, which was edited and published by Professor Edward Ives, Sandy Ives, to his friends at the University of Maine in a nice publication of these Prince Edward Island songs. 2 years later, I was driving my Volvo station wagon up to Orono, Maine, to the university. I stayed with Bobby and Sandy Ives and came back with 1/3 of his beautiful archive and duplicated it because our people said, "Did you go out in the field?" Yeah, I went out in the field and I got collections. I mean, poor Gordon, he'd go out and in 3 days he'd get a few cylinders. Or Lomax, how many minutes of recordings would they get? I come back, from a weekend and many, many hours. Well, I'm glad to say, I believe that the entire University of Maine Northeast Folklore Archive will be duplicated, or if it hasn't already, and be part of the center's archive.
And you can come to the Folklife Reading Room to hear it. And we invite you all to everyone who hasn't been to the Folklife Reading Room, to visit the American Folklife Center. I am inviting you as of this moment, and I look forward to seeing you there and welcoming you.
Tell them Joe sent you.
That's right. Now, Joe, where I want to start is that moment when we first appeared on your radar, when you were a student, when you first became aware of this archive at the Library of Congress.
Okay. Well, I had little tricklings of notion that there was such a thing, because my parents, I grew up in New Haven. I was born in 1935. by the 40s, I noticed they had a book on their shelf, Treasury of American Folklore by B.A. Botkin. Certainly there was mention of the archive there. He had been head of the archive for 3-4 years during World War II. And then they had a copy of Ballads and Songs of America, compiled by John and Alan Lomax, certainly mentions of the archive. Then when I went to Oberlin College and discovered all Folkways records, Stinson records, and all that, I was enamored with these notes on the sleeve back by Kenneth S. Goldstein. And often a song, this is from the Library of Congress Archive of American Folk Song or Folk Song. So it's sort of built up. Then my senior year at Oberlin, I heard my first field recording. A professor had come to campus and he had a tape of an air check of Ain't No Grave Can Hold My Body Down by Bosie Sturdivant, which still is my favorite cut among how many millions now? Wow. Anyway, I met a woman. I got my BA in physics, but I was spending more and more extracurricular time with folk music. Big spur was Pete Seeger. He came every year. His first concerts were my first year, second, third, fourth. Started with 200 people, ended with over 1,000. Kind of a trend going on, eh? What? Well, I finished my BA in physics, but early my senior year, I met a woman named Anne Grimes, who was an officer in the Ohio Folklore Society. She had a Folkways record, and performed and collected dulcimers, Appalachian dulcimers in Ohio. And I asked her, thinking that she would laugh up or, chortled at me, is there some place to do graduate work in folk music? She said she thought there were, but I should write to her good friend, Mrs. Ray Corson, head of the Archive of Folk Song, Library of Congress. I did.
I went into the correspondence files and found the letter. Stamped by the Music Division, dated November 15, 1956, addressed to Mrs. Ray Corson, Folklore Division, Congressional Library, Washington, D.C. Dear Mrs. Corson, I am a senior at Oberlin College and I am interested in folk music, even though I'm a physics major. At the moment, I have made no plans for next year, but the possibility of pursuing a career in folk music is present in my mind. However, I have little idea of what avenues are open to college graduates in such a field. Upon speaking to Mrs. Grimes of the Ohio Folklore Society, she suggested that I write to you, for you might be able to advise me as to what colleges offer graduate work in folk music and folklore, and to whom I may write for further information about schools or jobs. Thank you very much for your trouble. All right, that was November 15th. And on November 21st, an admirable turnaround time for snail mail, Ray Corson writes, Dear Mr. Hickerson, in reply to your letter of November 14th, I will be glad to suggest some institutions you might contact concerning your interest in folk music. Scholarly work in graduate level requires a good knowledge of the non-musical aspects of folklore, as well as general musicianship. Read between the lines. You have to be more than a folk singer with a guitar. Indiana University at Bloomington has a particularly active graduate program in folk music and also in the related fields, et cetera, et cetera. So she steered you in the right direction.
Yeah, I applied. I was accepted. If the graduate school would accept me, they accepted me. So I wrote home. My mother was a proto-archivist. Saved a bunch of my letters, and there it was. Dear folks, guess what? So I went to IU. My first visit here was the summer of 1958. Our good friend from Oberlin, who had grown up in Vienna, Sarah Newcomb, she knew the archives. She used to come in here as a high school student. Weren't supposed to. But Ray Corson liked her very much, and that was important. And so we came in with Nuke and met Ray, and he looked around and in awe of all the stuff that was here. And I came back once before, and then 1961, I was here for a week on a grant, National Science Foundation grant, working on my bibliography of American Indian music. And I spent a week in the archive, music division, elsewhere in the library, working on that. Also in 1961, my roommate, Phil Kennedy, spent a year here as reference librarian. It didn't work out, but every once in a while he'd send me a letter or even call me with a question that he couldn't answer. And I guess The only one I remember was they got a query from the House Un-American Activities Committee about a song called Talking House Un-American Activity Blues. Well, I had a 78, with Betty Sanders singing that on a charter label, and I made a little tape and I sent it in. So I guess you could say I was being a volunteer at that time. Well, I was here in 1962 for American Folklore Society meeting, and one of the sessions was in the library, so I went in to see my friend Ray, and she called me in and sit down, and she said, Joe, we have an opening for reference librarian. How would you like to apply? And here are the forms. So I applied, and I got the job, and I had to finish the semester, so I started June 18th, it says, 1963.
1960. So we're up to 1963. You're here. Who was here when you got here?
Well, the staff was head, Ray Corson, secretary, rather new, Pat Markland, lovely woman and perfect secretary, and the reference librarian.
We don't have those anymore.
The reference librarian, which became me. But right next door, joining us, was the recording laboratory, which was an offshoot of the archive, really, in 1941, because so many demands on the archive for duplication of discs or bringing in people to record. Woody Guthrie, sure, Alan Lomax recorded Woody Guthrie at the Department of Interior radio station. Or they might record Jelly Roll Morton on the stage of Coolidge Auditorium because there was a piano there.
So who was in there? Bob Carneal?
Bob Carneal was chief engineer. John Howell was brand new assistant engineer.
John Howell.
Right. And after about 3 years, for 2 years, they hired Gary Henderson, the mainstay of bluegrass programming on WAMU.
Now, the recording lab was air conditioned, right?
Oh, that was nice. It was built with air conditioning. Because of the equipment and whatnot, and there was a door in between. So the archive was semi-air conditioned. But also, in the back, they had a TV set and a big table with a lot of chairs. So we'd often take our brown bag lunch in there and enjoy that. But when the All-Star game was on in the World Series, which were always in the afternoon, there was no 6th floor, there was no Madison building. The 2nd floor folks would come down. Head of reference department, and who come down with their lunch and watch the game.
So by the next year, you had established this wonderful ritual in the archive of having visitors sign a guest book. And this was a courtly, almost a courtly, a very gracious ritual in which you would invite people to sign a blank book to put their names and addresses when they visited. Served a dual purpose of keeping track of who came, and also, if they left behind their eyeglasses, we could find them again to deliver whatever we'd left behind. I went into the stacks and dug out your first guest register here.
That's the register for the rare book materials.
Because
before that, if people came in to use rare materials, there was a special register. And our rare materials really was the WPA Federal Writers Project and 13 steel cabinets legal size, which most of the time were on top of each other. And of course, if they wanted something, it was always in the top one.
So this one's from January 1964, and I just went through about the first 10 pages of this.
Oh no, I'm wrong.
It's amazing who's in the first 10 pages. George Corson, the folklorist and collector, bluegrass writer Pete Kuykendall, who went on to edit Bluegrass Unlimited, musician Mike Seeger, musician and folklorist, pretty well-known singer-songwriter Jesse Colin Young of the Youngbloods. Remember, Come On, People Now, Smile on Each Other. He was here. Oh, yeah. Gus Mead, Guthrie T. Mead, came in with someone who just signed his name as John Hurt. Was Mississippi John Hurt.
That's right.
Ralph Rinsler, I addressed this to our colleagues from the Rinsler Archive. He was here in 1964, but he listed his affiliation at that time was Newport Folk Festival. We also had Judy Collins, that very well-known singer.
I had other staff members asking, when is that lovely lady with the blue eyes coming in again?
Also Jack Holtzman of Elektra Records, and Harold Corlander. I mean, it goes on and on. So that's just the first 10 pages. So you were rather famous for your guest book ritual. And
Well, you know, my first 2 years, I was young and a bachelor, and I went to these evening concerts. And there were a lot of folk music concerts because there was money being made on folk music up in the upper levels of the commerce, musical commerce. And I go to the Bassins or the Brickskeller, and, you know, I just introduce myself. And, you know, in those days, if you didn't know each other, you knew you had people in common. You knew people in common. I went to see Bonnie Dobson, and Bonnie Dobson, I said, you know Dick Bauman, don't you? Dickie Bauman, he was the first one to teach me guitar at camp. And Dick had told me that, but I didn't believe him. But I had. And you know, and I'd say, we should come down to the archive. And that's where a lot of them did, Eddie West. And Jose Feliciano. He came in with 2 Seeing Eye Girls. I don't think he didn't sign the guest book. That's all right.
So people would come into the Folklife reading room, and you were famous for, you know, creating a very welcoming space. And whoever walked in the door, I witnessed this over and over again. Whoever walked into that door, Joe would say, "Hi, how you doing? Where are you from?" And if they'd say Ohio, "Oh, do you know the Ohio Folklore Society folks? Becky." You'd say,
Becky Schrader.
Schraders. Do you know the Schraders? And, oh, there's this great song in our archive from Ohio, and it goes like this. Or, do you know this joke? So whoever walked in the door, Joe would figure out some way to connect with them. And wow, I just marveled at your ability to welcome people in that way.
She's got a steel trap memory.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I wish I'd picked that up from you. So in addition to people coming in to do their research in person, they would write letters in. It was the era of snail mail. And I remember you having some letters posted near your desk that were basically your funny file. Can you remember any of your favorite, most interesting or funniest letters that got written to you?
Well, you remember one that I had forgotten. What was it? Send me all the folk songs, American folk songs?
Oh, yeah.
All of them, right.
Send me a list of all American folk
Right.
songs. Right.
Well, I used to have an envelope on my bulletin board. I don't think there was anything in it. Joe Hickerson, how many errors do you find here? Joe Hickerson, National Archive, Smithsonian Institute, Washington, D.C., and it came to me. Actually, one of my favorites was a letter from a man in Grass Valley, California. I'd never heard of Grass Valley, but it conjured up, you know, grass. I learned later there was a weed, California, too. But he said that a couple years before, he had come in to listen to some of the reference copies, and at that time we had a separate room where they could do that. And he said he smuggled in a tape recorder. And he copied fiddlers like Luther Strong and W.M. Step, W.H. Step. Well, we couldn't fault his taste. But then he said, and then I found God. And in retribution, I am enclosing a check for $37.50, equivalent to 1 hour of custom duplication.
He came clean. That's excellent. It was the atmosphere when I came in 1987. Let us just say there was a rich occupational folklore. There was a culture in the office of, for one thing, there were pranking traditions. There were a lot of pranks played, and you know, the ones that had gone on before informed the later ones. One tradition in our office was to play a joke on the new hire, the greenhorn. And in fact, you had this happen to you. Someone pranked you when you first came. Who
Twice.
was it? Twice.
The first day, I got one of those memorandum of call messages left on my desk. They don't use them anymore.
Those yellow government telephone message pads?
And somebody written into Joe from T period B period. Please call and check that. And there was a number. I should have suspected something. There was no initial of who took this at what time and date and time. So I called up the number and I got a recording that said something like, "Hello, my name is Tinkerbell. And I want you to come over to see me, all of me, at the Golden Slipper.
Who was responsible for that one? My hat's off to
It's
them.
got to be one of the boys in the lab, Bob Carneal or John Howell. They're shoulders.
And then when Marcia McGuire came to work at the archive, Marcia, are you here? Marcia McGuire was our one-person processing department. When she came to work here, Jerry Parsons played a great prank on her, which...
Well, a prelude to that, the other prank on me was similar to that.
Oh, right, we forgot the
Don
second.
Levitt, who had been here for a while, was walking in front of my desk with a 16-inch acetate disc. Said, well, I better return this 16-inch glass base, extremely fragile, recording of Jelly Roll Morton back. I should have been suspicious. He didn't make 16-inch discs; they were 12. And he accidentally drops it, and I'm dashing out of my desk. Was it barfing or barking my shins? Of course, it's smithereens. Well, it was a blank disc. So when I hired Jerry, he was a friend of mine. I didn't do any of that with him. But when Marcia was hired, Jerry, I think it was more Jerry than me, we concocted the idea. He came in, he had taken a cylinder box and shaved off the bottom. So there was no bottom. And the cylinder was a blank cylinder he got from the lab. And he came in while I was talking to Marcia the first day. He said, well, we just got this rare one-of-a-kind cylinder of Patsy Toohey, the Irish...
famous Ilian
Piper who died in 1923. And we should give... Of course, he had his little finger at the bottom holding it in place. This might be her first project. Hands it to her.
It fell right out the bottom of the cylinder container.
Isn't that awful?
Marcia nearly had a heart attack.
But she's stuck with it.
Oh, I'd like to take a moment to recognize Peggy Parsons. Jerry's widow, Peggy Parsons, is here. Peggy, could you stand? Thank you.
Hi, Peggy.
She continues to be very much part of our lives and kind of oversees the Gerald E. and Corinne Parsons Fund for Ethnography here at the American Folklife Center. And Jerry lives on by through this fund, which funds scholars to come and work with ethnographic collections in the Library of Congress. And we're so grateful. Thank you so much, Peggy. Ray Corson was going away on vacation one time.
Oh, the first time,
Speaking of Jerry, right.
The first time Ray left the office for a day, she very seriously said, Joe, don't give away the archive. And I didn't detect any humor in that, but she wasn't that type of person. She might have meant it lightly. But anyway, well, I told that story to Jerry, and he already knew the story. But the first time I left after I hired Jerry in 1974 to be reference librarian, a couple of weeks later, I was going away for the day, I said, don't give away the archive. And he said, no, boss, I'll get a good price.
I'm seeing someone in the back there who was very much a part of our lives from, well, I don't know when you came, Aldona Kamantauskas, now Aldona Joseph. Aldona's in the back, big part of the reference team in the reading room. Pardon? 83, and I came in 87. Aldona was a folk dancer on the same English Morris dance team that I was on. So we were all performers. My goodness, Alan Jabor was out there playing old-time music at festivals. You were performing at folk festivals. Aldona was dancing. Judith was playing in gamelan orchestras. It was a great place. No wonder I wanted to come work here. Let me take this moment to ask former staff members of the American Folklife Center to stand and be recognized. Aldona's already standing up, but Jeff Place.
And interns.
Volunteers.
And
Carl
Library
Fleischer.
of Congress recruits who spent 5 days there. Or interns.
Thank you. Yes, Carl Fleischauer saw it all, and he knows where all the bodies are buried, too. So, well, there were ways that people would feel so grateful after having great research experiences and being reunited. You were talking about your favorite kinds of patrons. You had two favorite kinds of patrons or experiences in the reading room. One was, remind me, you were talking about, in particular, Native Americans who came in.
Yeah, there was a category of people that most affected me, and those were people who would come in. I very swiftly, I got to know that kind of look that they had. They were looking around in awe, they were uncertain, and they would say something like, well, years ago, somebody came to our home with big equipment and recorded, and somebody in their past, in their family. And within 10 minutes, they're listening. I remember a number of times it was Native Americans. And those recordings go back to 1890. They're the earliest. And they'd be listening to people long past, related to them, singing songs that were long gone. But then they could then get copies and reintroduce. And there was often weeping while they were listening over the earphones. But we once got a visitor from a couple from Texas. They were on tour. And he said, often it's the son or daughter, grandchildren. But he said, when I was little, a man came to his home in Texas and recorded his brother and him singing children's songs in Spanish. Well, we got his name, we looked the card catalog. And the archive disc collection with the Lomaxes started in 1933, but organized cataloging started in 1935. And AFS-1 was not the earliest recording, it's just that batch was done first. This guy was on AFS-1.
Amazing.
Jerry interviewed him.
Amazing.
But then there was the couple that came in from Michigan. They were looking around and, can I help you? And said, well, years ago somebody came to our family house in Wisconsin and recorded my father, who was a fiddler. Oh, yes. I didn't want to sound too interested because I had heard from Ray Corson and Don Levitt the story of how a few years before, when they were working on an LP of Wisconsin folk songs and ballads, they wanted to include 3 or 4 selections by this fiddler whose name was Luzime Brousseau, just a fantastic transplanted French-Canadian fiddler in Wisconsin. And the widow of Luzime Brousseau and daughter would not allow this unless they were paid $1,000. They wrote to their congressman who inquired, and they discovered that the revolving fund and at the very small stipend from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the whole budget was less than $1,000 practically. And the revolving fund, any sales go back to the revolving fund. The recording lab has never been funded by Congress. No congressional appropriation. And they write back urging them to give. They never did. So Ray Corson tells this guy, who's a son, and he's so dismayed and distressed. He said, I left home early and I taught high school in Michigan. I just retired and we're here visiting. Look, if you ever want to issue that in the future, here's my address. So a little while later, Alan Jabor was editing the fiddle record. He wanted to use 4 cuts, wrote to him, he gave him permission.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. So much of the ice is broken when people come into the reading room and we meet them face to face. And so many diplomatic efforts like that were led by you.
But let me just read a short list of some of the personages that came in. Way before me, Pete Seeger and then Odetta. But when I was there, one of the first, twice, Will Geer came in because he was no friend of the Corsons. At one time, the Kingston Trio came in. There's Nick Reynolds and his wife, Leslie, and Bob Shane. And they came in, and by then there were computers, and I'd done computer printout of everything Kingston Trio from copyright and the LC catalog, and it was stacked this high. And Nick Reynolds sitting there said, Joe Hickerson, that name sounds familiar. And so I opened a copy of one of the original printings of Where Have All the Flowers Gone? That says Pete Seeger, and then additional verses by Joe Hickerson. Very few of them said that. And he looked and he said, "Oh, which verses did you write?" I said, "The fourth and fifth." And he reached out his hand to shake mine and said, "Thank you." And I took it and said, "Thank you." And we had 3 members of Pearl Jam came in once.
I was there, and so was Peter Bardis.
I just acquired
Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam.
I just acquired a 16-inch transcription, NBC audition of Leadbelly, which turned out to have Woody Guthrie introducing Leadbelly. So I played him a tape of that. I like that.
Harry Belafonte, don't forget him.
Well, Harry Belafonte came in during the Ray Corson era and was greatly influenced by her in 2 ways. Listening to Mark Twain, the Mississippi River Call. His first LP was Mark Twain. That was the title. But also, she said to him, "You're from Jamaica. You're singing American folk songs and British. Why don't you sing songs from your country?" He started his Calypso record in 1955 really made his career.
The rest is history, right?
And Odetta. Learned "Ain't No Grave Can Hold My Body Down." And every time she sang it, she gave honor to the archive and Ray Corson.
Did any of those famous visitors ever send us any money in appreciation? There's one I can think of, actually, a folk songer named Michael Cooney, who moved
as
to
a friend of mine
DC
used to
be close
say,
to us.
"Senator, I'm glad you asked me that question."
We'll be passing around a collection plate shortly. But.
That's right. Nobody will be allowed to leave.
Well, the music division had a Friends
Okay.
Fund.
Yeah, well,
Right.
occasionally somebody would give, just in gratitude, give us some money. We had to send it. They were sending it back because there was no fund to put it in connection with the archive. And then the old timers in the music division retired, and Don Levitt, assistant chief of it, he said, we found that we could take the check and put it into the Friends of Music Fund. And then if there was ever a fund in the archive, then it would be transferred. Well, Michael Cooney had taken an idea that Pete Seeger wrote about from time to time, that these songs on the LPs that are public domain, no songwriter is getting royalties for that, so the entire royalty is going to the record company. Well, Michael Cooney was very adamant. He said, that money should be, that 50% of every public domain song recorded should be donated to the archive. So by 1978, we were administratively part of the brand new American Folklife Center, and we were able to establish a Friends of the Folk Archive Fund, and the first major gift was Michael Cooney donating $500. And that was announced at our 50th anniversary celebration, the evening concert that Peter Bardis helped put together.
Peter, you're here, right? Peter? All right. Could I actually have the current members of the American Folklife Center staff stand right now so everyone could see who you are? Everybody, yeah, Judith Gray, Nancy Gross, Stephanie Hall, Kate Stewart, Nicole Saylor, Ann Hood, Steve Winnick, Peter Bardis, Valdemaris, Thea Austin.
And some of them are former interns,
That's right.
or paid interns, Stephanie, Kathy Kirst.
Which brings me
Marsha.
to the question about the internship. You started the internship program at the archive, and you were such a wonderful steward of that program until your retirement. Can you tell us a little bit? We're running out of time, so I needed to be kind of abbreviated description of how you started it. But it's such a big piece of the archive's identity. The interns, and especially interns who went on to careers in folklore, interns like Lisa Ornstein, Deborah Kodish, Maggie Holtzberg-Call, Jeff Place, who's here and now works for the Rinsler Archives, Frank Coram, Lucy Long, Gary Boaz, and there were interns that ended up at the American Folklife Center. Marsha McGuire, Thea Austin, Kathy Kirst, Stephanie.
Well, it all started with the occasional volunteer. The music division, those in charge seemed to think that really the library didn't take volunteers, but occasionally there'd be someone who would come into the archive and help out. And the thing got precipitated. Oh, and then in 1963 or 4, Library of Congress started having a recruit program. They would take people with MLSs and certain select ones and have a several-week program and having a week of electives. And some of them chose the folk archive for that elective. David Kresh did, Carolyn Sung, and Mary Kay DeWeese was the first one. She's still here. But you know, it all was precipitated in 1971. Really, the unrest, this murders in Kent State caused a lot of universities and colleges to reorganize, reconstruct their schedules and whatnot. Oberlin College, my alma mater, created 2 semesters with a winter term. And each student was required 3 of the 4 Januaries to do a winter term project, either at Oberlin or out in the workplace. And so as an alum, I got this letter saying, A, would you be able to put an Oberlin student up at your home for the month of January? But B, do you have a place at your workplace that you could take on an Oberlin student? And so I took this to Alan Jabor, who was at that time director of the archive, and I said, this looks pretty good, and he agreed. I wrote back, and among our first, what we came to call interns, were Brad Leftwich, highly well known. He did all the fiddling for the events at the American Folklore Society in Bloomington, which was about 2.5 years ago. Shanti Elder, who became fiddle champ of Alaska, and Lisa Ornstein was mentioned, who became a public sector folklorist in Maine, and with very proficient at Franco-American, Canadian, and practitioner, and still very active. Lives in Portland, is married to Bess Lomax Hawes's son, Nick.
Well, you had traditions for the interns. They had to do certain things, and there was some continuity about it. Every time interns would finish up their internship, we would have an intern farewell lunch. I well remember these. We went to a certain Chinese restaurant. We would order, a round of Chinese dishes. We would have wine. And can you remind us about the wine glass tradition?
Oh, the wine glass. Well, actually, when we started on Capitol Hill, there was no Chinese restaurant. We went to the A&K. Mm-hmm. There was a waiter up there. We'd come up the second floor, and he kind of sniffed us coming because the table was set, the roditas was there, and the octopus and the tarama salad.
This was a Greek restaurant.
Right. So, but then the Chinese, yes, the wine, we'd pour out the wine, and some of the interns were reticent, but very often they would just grab it by the bowl, and we would toast. And I said, wait a minute, your last lesson as an intern, everybody hold their wine glass by the bowl. Let's go clunk, 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 clunk. Now, hold it by the stem. Now, it was pretty cheap glassware, but still, bing, bing, bing. Now, would you like to go throughout life being a clunker or make beautiful music? But here's an obscure reference. But beware the 9 tailors. Lord Peter Wimsey, the bells, right. Certain bell ringing, bing, 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 ah.
The musicians, interns, also had to go down to the bottom of the spiral staircase and look up. You would have them, there's this little Cinderella spiral staircase, staff only, the public doesn't usually go there, was outside our door. We used it to get to the tunnels, and the interns would have to go down to the bottom of the spiral staircase, and you would make them look up to see this amazing, it looked like a chambered nautilus as you looked up.
Indeed. I think we actually recruited one intern because she was sitting at the next table at one of our farewell parties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She said, this looks like fun, and it was fun. Well, you had them tour all the LC divisions, and
I developed
on reference aids and finding
I developed
aids.
a list of orientation things, and one of them, of course, was tour of various parts of the library, even the stacks in those days. We go to where the GRs are in the annex, Adams Building, and so on and so forth.
And those
backstage,
interns,
they recorded sound, and
they got a lot of important work done for us on finding aids, and Bob Clayton did the banjo finding aid, and gosh, Bob Walzer did the sea shanty finding aid, and we got all kinds of work out of our interns.
Absolutely.
That was great, and I want to recognize my colleague Ann Hoog for continuing the Anne, would you stand up? And if anybody here wants to intern, contact Anne Hood.
Yay.
And Anne made sure the intern program survived after Joe left.
And Anne was never an intern, but she hung out with them.
Right.
Help organize the parties, the intern parties.
Our interns were, a
whoever's
lot of
house
them
it
were
happened to be.
musicians and had fantastic music parties all over DC.
And toward the end, I had, we had to distinguish between interns and volunteers who could only come in 1 day a week. My requirement, if possible, was to spend a minimum of 200 hours. And these, so I had a group of 3 who were my age, or one who was older, and a little younger. We had Carol Moran, who had been an intern. She's here, right? Hi, Carol.
Hey, Carol.
Jack Menashevitz. And
Jack's here.
Hey, Jack. And the late Hubie King.
Hubie
King, who was older than I, and any reference I had to a pop song back there, he had twice the information.
Also a wonderful performer.
Oh, yeah, and banjo
Yeah.
player, and started the Old Time Jam radio show on all classical, on bluegrass country. And we had a couple of reunions after retirement.
Hey, speaking of being a musician and performing, here's something I've always wondered about your career in archiving and performing, is that in 1957, you became a grad student in folklore at Indiana University, which was the first institution to grant a PhD in this new discipline of folklore, instead of it being in an English department. One of the people that you studied with at Indiana University was Dick Dorson, who was kind of famously anti-folk festival. And you were already a fully fledged performer by the time you got to Indiana.
I didn't think I was fully fledged.
Yeah, but you'd already released an album on Folkways with the Folksmiths.
Well, Moash would issue anyone.
Come on. I think it's a pretty impressive accomplishment.
Hey, but my sweetie Ruth is on that 1957 LP,
Ruth
which is now a
Bolliger, please
CD
stand.
out
Ruth
there.
Bolliger was in the original 8-person lineup of the Folksmiths.
So if you don't believe me, ask Ruth.
Right. So there you were studying with Dick Dorson. He's kind of anti-festival, a little bit anti-performing, and yet you persisted with your performing in the face of that. So tell me a little about that.
Well, actually, it wasn't in the face of it. That's the thing.
Ah, okay.
No, well, I build up my interest in just sitting around and singing with people and going and leading sings at Oberlin, but it was all extracurricular. There was no academic folklore ethnomusicology. It was extracurricular.
Mm-hmm.
And so at IU, I figured I'd do some of the same if I could find people to sing with, and they started a coffee house, and but that was all extracurricular. Ellen Steckert, who arrived the same time I did, and we arrived the same week that Dorson arrived to start the program. She had been singing at Cornell, much more than I had experience. She had 3 LPs out, and Harold Thompson, who taught the folk song and ballad course at Cornell, would like to have a student to come in and perform examples.
Mm-hmm.
So she was used to that sort of interface.
Mm-hmm.
I was not. It was always extracurricular.
Mm-hmm.
It was fine with me. I didn't argue with Dorson. There was plenty to learn, plenty to do of other stuff. Work in archives there. I loved it.
And you just used 2 different names, right? There was Joe Hickerson, the performer, and Joseph C. Hickerson, the archivist.
But as I say in one of my notes to my LCD, both are the real me.
You also promised that today you would tell all and reveal nothing.
Well, that's
I wish you would reveal to us, all of us who work in the archive have our favorite singers, our favorite performers from the collections. Mine is Elmer George. I also love Elmer Barton. You fall in love with these voices from the past and the songs that they're singing. Who were the performers on our field recordings that most drew you?
Well, that's interesting. The similar name. Ward Ford, a singer from Wisconsin, part of a family of singers. They'd moved from New York, were working in Wisconsin, and Sidney Robertson Cowell was the first to record them, and recorded Ward Ford especially at later times as well. And he was a straight singer. He just let the song do it. And I used to play, early days, I play some examples as part of a lecture on the archive, and I play his recording of the Battle of Antietam Creek. And it sort of crept in until I had to learn it on my own time.
Right. After those heavy oak doors clanged shut at night.
Right. The other was Fields Ward of the Ward family from Galax. Wade Ward, his uncle, was a famous banjo player, and his father, Davy Crockett Ward, played instruments. And they had a family band, and then they had a band with Uncle Nick Dunford and somebody else called the Bog Trotters. And he had moved during World War II to Bel Air, northeast of Baltimore, for work. And I had a young friend from Indianapolis named Pat Dunford, who was related to Uncle Eck Dunford and had visited with his father, family members there, and knew these people. And so Pat came to town, and we drove down to the Galax. The only time I was at the Galax Old Time Fiddlers Convention was my first summer here. And we drove down, and I met Fields Ward, came down to that festival for the first time in 25 years. And he was amazing. He sang unaccompanied. The only other person to sing unaccompanied in the ballad and song part was Hazel Dickens. Everybody else kind of played simple guitar and sang late 1890s songs, and he was disappointed. It was not a good homecoming. But I went up to his house and visited him and his wife, and recorded them 2 or 3 times, and he had a series of 5 little notebooks where his father, Davy Crockett Ward, and he said his father used a stub of a pencil. You could not see the pencil inside his hand, would laboriously write out the text of the family songs for the family to maintain. And so I would go through all of them, and I had made a list of all the songs that the Lomaxes and others had recorded of the Wards and the Bog Trotters. And one of my favorites that I found there was not on that list. It was this version of Rosin the Bow, which I sing to this day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are wonderful songs, and I'm always happy when I hear you perform them. And you are going to perform something from the collections today. There'll be one more song that you can all join in with. But I just want to kind of wrap up the interview by kind of reviewing the themes of what's emerged in our discussions about your years here. Woven through everything we're talking about are these few themes of this blend of meticulous scholarship, and everybody knows about your steel trap mind. You could find something at the bottom of a pile you put there 25 years ago. You could see a set of numbers on a table and recall them 10 years later. So this, meticulousness of yours, that blend of meticulous scholarship and the joy you take in the collections and performing the collections, your gift for creating this welcoming space and connecting with people who shared your love of these materials, and the value of humor in the workplace. I mean, I remember looking up from my work sometimes and saying, "What's that sound?" And it was you playing a tune on your teeth with a pencil. I'm not going to make you do it now.
I learned it in 9th grade from Danny Silvestri. He only did one tune, the William Tell Overture, only he didn't know that name. He thought it was the Lone Ranger.
That's right, it was the William Tell Overture on his teeth with a pencil. I swear. So thank you for all the things that you taught us about this, and we do our best to carry those forward into the next generation. And speaking of the next generation, after you retired, we were able to hire Michael Taft as the next head of the archive. He served from 2002 to 2012. He was here for 10 years. And when Michael Taft retired and went back to Canada, in between there, this revolution was happening. The digital revolution was happening, and the landscape was completely changing. And we knew we had to learn new ways to get the champagne out of the bottle. And this was to start digitizing our collections, because it would both preserve them and get them out to everybody on the whole World Wide Web. So we looked for somebody who could very ably help us do that. And we were very fortunate to be able to steal from the University of Iowa libraries someone who is exquisitely qualified to captain our ship into this digital sea. And she is the current head of the archive, Nikki Saylor. Can you stand up, Nikki? Thank you. So you'll see a burst of activity in that direction as Nikki guides us through this phase, this new phase of our institutional lives. Before we have a song together and go our separate ways, I wanted to give the audience, give all of you, some of you who've known Joe longer than I have, a chance to ask Joe a few questions. So I see the first question is going to be from Chuck Moran. If you wait till Jonathan gets to you with the mic, because this is all being taped for webcast.
Joe, is that on? Joe, my favorite humor thing from you, favorite joke, is the song from Norfolk University. Can you still do that?
Gosh, I don't do that often. You know, I think I discovered, at Oberlin, we didn't have much in the way of college songs, but I went to IU and started working in the IU Manuscript Folklore Archive, and there were, you know, these undergraduates from Michigan State, because Dorson brought his collection from there, and Indiana University, you know, just went next door to their roommates, you know, or their buddies, and collected lots and lots of sorority songs, beer drinking songs, and fraternity songs. And of course, one of them was, we are the girls from Norfolk U. We don't smoke and we don't chew. Norfolk, Norfolk, Norfolk U.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Joe? Any more questions? Yes.
Hi, I was wondering how the nature of what people are interested in collecting in terms of like a folk context has changed since you've been here, or if it's just you see a kind of continuous thing, or because, you know, new cultures come into America, new technologies, ways of making music. Has that changed the way that people relate to this folk tradition and what they want to archive?
Well, I see a steadily broadening of purview. When I came here, because of my involvement in active folk singing, I was increasingly interested and able to acquire for the archive and for the other parts of the library materials that had to do with derivative activities from the basic folklore stuff, you might say, like the folk song revival, bluegrass. I mean, the bibliographies, I did a lot of bibliographies at first because there was time to do that, and we had a wonderful typist. So I compiled the first known bibliography published of bluegrass, dulcimer, and a whole bunch of different subjects, because questions would come in about that. And it was easier to have a prepared list, you know, to mail to someone of these publications and where they could get them. You know, and so, and then as the folk song revival developed, you know, I wanted to make sure these developments were represented in the recordings and whatnot in the library. And of course, the world of folklore and ethnomusicology has expanded its scope to really include anything that can be defined in terms of community or process, or groups of people getting together and sharing and enjoying their traditions.
And that can all be carried on in the digital realm, as our complete line of finding aids and reference aids are online at www.loc.gov/folklife.
But please don't slash the budget.
Yes.
You mentioned Pete Seeger as stimulating your early interest in folk song, and I'm wondering if you could comment on what made him, such a legend. What singular qualities about Pete Seeger made him such a great force in folk music?
Well, so much has been written about that and wondered about that, and it boils down to his love of getting people together, sharing, acting on the local level, and song and music. And my reaction to Pete Seeger is the treatment of, in a way, of Pete Seeger materials and whatnot by the archive over the years. I mean, obviously there was a connection because Charles Seeger, his father, was a friend of all the older people in the music division, and very influential on some of them. So, Pete comes along and gets kind of maverick and left wing and stuff like that. So some of the people in the archive became cautious, and kind of didn't tout him. I mean, if you said in 1960-something or 50-something, oh, let's put Pete Seeger on the front cover of this or that, you wouldn't get to first base. Then, when they had the Seeger celebration, the Seeger family celebration, there was Pete Seeger on the cover of the Folklife Center newsletter. We come a long way, baby.
Yep. One more question from Kathy Mack.
Hello. There's a story going around that the circularity of the verses of Where Have All the Flowers Gone is completed by you, has something to do with a Russian folk song. Have you heard this story, and is that just one of those amazing coincidences?
It is coincidental. She's referring to the fact that Pete Seeger wrote his first three verses of Where Have All the Flowers Gone, having read the novel by Mikhail Shokolov called And Quiet Flows the Don, which really takes place in what is now Ukraine, but in those days it was Russia, And it's poignant because the first section of And Quiet Flows the Don is titled Peace. And you have the young people going off to work, but they're mostly behind the barn, doing that sort of thing. And then the old men get together and smoke their pipes and sip whatever and recount their exploits in the Korean War, like it was so cold. To shave, you put snow there, and when it got hot, you set fire to your beard, and when it got too hot, you put snow on it. And the women doing all the work in the kitchen would grouse about these two classes of people. And there was a short beginning of a translation with a translation that I saw of Russian, or it's a Cossack area, Ukrainian song, where all the wild goose, they're wild geese, they're nestled in the bulrushes, where the bulrushes, young girls that picked them, where all the young girls, they're off with their young men, where are the Cossacks, they've gone off to war. Well, Pete put together Where Have All the Flowers Gone, the first three verses. I extended it in May 1960 because for two reasons. We were singing it at Indiana University at parties. And, people would get into harmony and whatnot and be over. So we would repeat the verses. And also, I was preparing for my second year as counselor, a folk music counselor at Camp Woodland. I knew the kids would like it, but it was so short. And it occurred to me, universal symbolism. I didn't make it up. Soldiers into graveyards covered with flowers, and put the verse at the end. I was always intrigued with circular songs. And that's what achieved the circularity of that song. Now, Ethel Rame, I think it was. No, it was A.L. Lloyd who found a text of the original song. The original song happened to be circular. I heard from a scholar from Germany. He found a Russian printing from the early 19th century of the song. Then, a little later, he sent me a copy of a German printing of a German song that was earlier than that, which seemed to be the same song.
Okay.
And after the big hit over here, Marlene Dietrich recorded it in Germany. And then Joan Baez recorded the German version over here.
And this was all after the fact.
Yep. Well, speaking of songs, let's do one, and one inspired by our collections. This is something you found in the archive.
I just mentioned two things about digitization. When that word started to be bandied about, I did two things. First of all, I suggested to the cafeteria they specialize in finger food. And I carried a 3x5 card. Can you still get 3x5 cards these days? Oh, good. 3x5 cards with 5 numbers on it. And I said, they digitized the Gettysburg Address. Well, it was
This is what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm
What
talking
are you?
about. Now, there are some song sheets for Bright
good.
Morning Stars Are Rising. If we could have somebody pass those out. Steve Winnick is
Okay,
coming
here's
up
a
the aisle.
song that I
Many of
heard
you know this song already.
At Fox Hollow Folk Festival in 1966 and 7, they were sung by 4 people, Tony Solatan and Robin Christensen and their wives. Robin was married to Ellen, Tony was married to Irene Kasoy, the Kasoy sisters, and the 4 of them sang this song in beautiful harmony. The next summer, they sang it again, and I went up to Tony. I'm not the kind that says, give me that song. I said, where is that song from? She said, well, we learned it from Robin, who learned it from Peggy Seeger, who it's in her mother's book, American Folk Songs for Christmas. And he said, if you look in the beginning and in the acknowledgement, she really cites very precisely where she got the song from, and she got so many transcribing field recordings from here. And sure enough, I look it up, and there's an AFS number. And I get the reference tape out, and I listen to it, and this G.D. Vowell is the singer, 1937, Harlan, Kentucky, recorded by Alan and Elizabeth Lomax for the archive. And I listened to it, and I didn't remember how they sang it up at Fox Hollow. Don't have that kind of mind. But I was smitten with this G.D. Vowell version, which goes like this. Are we ready for the first cut there?
We're going to hear the field recording from our archive.
Have to switch a patch cord or something.
Stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Day is a breaking in my soul. Oh, where art our dear Father? Oh, where art our dear Father? Oh, where art our dear Father? Day is breaking in my soul. Some have gone to heaven shouting. Some are going to heaven shouting. Some are going to heaven shouting. Day is breaking in my soul.
So, a song of jubilation. A song of jubilation. Well, I quickly learned it, and that got embedded in my mind, and I started singing it with friends around here. And then in February of 1968, I believe it was, my wife and I went up to Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania to visit her grandparents. And during the course of that weekend, the only time I ever did this, I wrote parts. I took the melody, and we had been singing Sacred Harp here, shape note, since 1964 on a regular basis. And so the tenor is the melody, and I composed a treble, soprano, alto, and a bass. Of course, bass is the best part, because it's the only one I can sing. And we were singing this. And then one day, I took the tape, a copy of G.D. Vowell, out to my neighbor's house in Accokeek, John Dildine, a good friend, and a professional sound engineer. He had good equipment. We put that on, and my wife Lynn and Jenny Dildine sang the soprano part. Mary Helen Shortridge sang the alto part, I sang the bass part. And we sang along with the field recording. Now, it's difficult to follow someone you can't see, especially if they're somewhat irregular in their musical habits, with pauses and this and that. Well, we did several takes, and we ended up with something. And so imagine yourself, we're all back there in 1937. We're in, flies on the wall, in that room where the recording is being made, and this might have happened as he's ending the song.
Okay, let's try that again.
All right.
Let's do it.
Okay, we'll sing the beginning. I'll sing the beginning, and then I'll do the concluding verses which I wrote. Bright morning stars are rising. 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 Day is breaking in my soul. Where are dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? Oh, where are our dear mothers? Day is breaking in my soul. They are down in the valley singing. 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 Day is breaking in my soul. Oh, where are our dear children? 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 Day is breaking in my soul. They are down in the valley singing. 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 Day is breaking in my soul. Bright morning stars are rising. 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 Day is breaking in my soul. Thank you. I didn't know the whole chorale was going to be here.
Thank you, Joe. I want to thank all of you for coming to hear Joe Hickerson today. I want to thank you, Joe, for all the lessons you've taught me and all of us at the archive and the American Folklife Center. I want you all to come back. Wednesday, July 3rd, we'll move over to the Coolidge Auditorium in the Jefferson Building for our homegrown concert, Sounds of Korea, traditional Korean music and dance from New York. August 3rd. Oh, I'm sorry. It's July. Just July 23rd. July 23rd. Yeah.
Scholars differ
in the
on
Coolidge, Korea, Sounds of Korea. Now, before you leave, I also want to remind you to look at the artwork on the way in the door. This was created by Liz Milner, one of Joe Hickerson's interns. She was moved to create this. She's a great cartoonist and artist. She's created the Amazing Joe comics series, and there's a fabulous cartoon about interns who were assigned to clean Joe's desk before he retired. It's excellent. So please look at Liz Milner's work. Now, because Joe was a co-founder, a founding member of the Folklore Society of Greater Washington, I feel justified in asking, passing on their request. They need volunteers to log their tapes of concerts. Stand up, Pat McGee, please. Find this man if you're interested in volunteering. You, too, can be a folk archivist by volunteering to log tapes.
They're coming to the center.
And they're coming to the archive at the American Folklife Center. So
Most of the tapes are already there. What we need now is people to listen to them and write down. At 8 minutes and 42 seconds, they started singing "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" That lasted until 11 minutes 12 seconds. At 11 minutes 13 seconds, etc.
So if you have this kind of precise mind that likes that kind of level of granularity, please volunteer. One last announcement is Joe is selling his fabulous CDs. They're for sale on the table in the back. And after you've bought your Joe Hickerson CDs, which contain songs, the songs you've heard here today, and many, many more from the archive and other sources, please, if you would like to hang out with Joe a little more, we'll be eating lunch in the 6th floor cafeteria, this floor of the Madison building in the public cafeteria. So thank you all for coming. Let's have another hand for Joe Hickerson.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.